What's going on, friends? 2014 was a huge turning point for Harley-Davidson, and honestly, it needed to happen, and it was about time that it did happen. Harley-Davidson made some serious updates, and those updates did not disappoint, nor were they only on the touring models. Project Rushmore actually touched other Harley-Davidson model families in one way or another. A few years before Project Rushmore was actually unveiled to the public, Polaris, reviving the Indian name, they were pretty much on the warpath with a target painted on Harley-Davidson's back. And with Indian, they were having the kind of success against Harley-Davidson that Polaris would have loved to have had with victory. Project Rushmore was a redesign of the Harley-Davidson touring models that was driven by customer feedback. Everything that went into these bikes was all derived from what customers said they wanted through extensive market research that Harley-Davidson did. Naturally, with Harley-Davidson, you got more, including with the price. But when it comes to Project Rushmore, there is a lot to unpack in this video. Guys, please don't forget, if you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to hit that like button, and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. Rushmore Harley-Davidson motorcycles were reimagined with comfort, versatility, and more power in mind. Now, I'll get to the power part a little later in the video because I know that's the part that we really all want to hear about. Now, one of the first big changes on the touring bikes with the Rushmore Project was the introduction of the hydraulic clutch. This was on all the touring bikes except the Road King. Now, as well intended as this clutch was, it really didn't age well and it had a lot of issues, which I did a whole video about, which you can check out if you're interested. ABS and linked braking systems became an available option. On the CVO models, they went to LED headlights, and every other model got some kind of upgraded halogen headlight. I don't know how much better it was than before because it was still a halogen headlight. Harley-Davidson took a big risk messing with the batwing fairing when they added the slipstream vent. Now, what that vent did was it allowed you to adjust it to where you could reduce that head buffeting that we all love, and if you wear a helmet or not, you definitely know what I'm talking about. Harley even added deeper and wider seats, and on bikes with the Tour Pack, they had redesigned backrests and redesigned armrests as well. The stock handlebars were reshaped and redesigned for better comfort and ergonomics, and probably one of my favorite features on the touring bikes that came out of Project Rushmore was the one-touch latch on the saddlebags and the trunks. All the switches on the handlebars were redesigned for a better feel, and the placement of all the switches, this was all driven by customer feedback. They really kind of took the pool of what every customer said of what they wanted and where they wanted it, and they collectively took all of that, and that's where they placed it on the bikes. Now, interestingly enough, on the rear suspension, this remained unchanged. But out front, Harley-Davidson did go with a more rigid fork, and they beefed it up a little bit. They went from the 43mm fork up to a 49mm fork, which was really nice. And honestly, I feel like the 2014s handle a lot better because of that. Now, one of the big changes out front on the Rushmore bikes that you probably noticed up front was that sleeker, slimmer fender, and also that much slimmer front wheel. And while they did update the wheels on the bikes, a little different design, Harley-Davidson claimed that these were actually lighter than previous years of the cast aluminum wheels. And being that slimmer, lower profile, I can see that, but Harley-Davidson really never got into any specifics about that. So if you've weighed a cast aluminum wheel off a 2014 and newer versus one of the older ones, I'm kind of curious of what weight difference you came up with. Now, if you're interested in tech in your motorcycle, this was the first year of the color touchscreen on the infotainment system. Now, these systems did have voice recognition, but it was 2014, so the caveat to that was you had to have a hardwired microphone to actually use the voice activation system. There wasn't any Bluetooth on these, but they did have auxiliary plug-ins. Now, what was a really cool feature for the time was the controls actually had a little joystick button, which you could control all of the functions of the infotainment system without having to take your hands off the handlebars. You could set your cruise, you could swap your settings, you could do just about anything while you're riding down the road. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'll leave that up to you, but at least you didn't have to take your hands off the handlebars to do it while you were riding down the road. Harley-Davidson tried to clean up the dash a little bit on these models. They went from 6 gauges down to 4. They were redesigned. They were easier to read. And the whole idea behind that was to try to make the dash look a little less cluttered and make your gauges easier to read with only having to look at 4 instead of 6. My opinion, being knowing Harley-Davidson a little bit, it might have just been a cost reduction measure. Now for the part that everybody wants to hear about. is the engine performance. This was also the first year of the twin cooling. Now, twin cooling was not really designed for performance. It was designed for comfort. But performance was kind of a nice little side effect of that comfort. Project Rushmore brought us the 103 high output engine with a redesigned higher flow airbox and more aggressive cams. Now, while the new airbox was designed for performance and putting a little more air into the engine, it was also designed with comfort in mind to be a little more ergonomic and to be a little more comfortable to rest your knee against. The next part of the 103 HO engine was the camshafts. Harley-Davidson put a little bit more aggressive cam in there, going from a 496 lift to a 511 lift, which gave you more low-end and mid-range torque, and which Harley-Davidson claimed that added about a 5% increase. Now, for the twin-cooled bikes, that increase was about 10% due to the fact that the twin cooling allowed them to run a little higher compression ratio at 10-to-1. At 10-to-1 compression, that's fairly decent for a twin-cam engine. Hence the extra 10% in horsepower and torque. Now, while the goal of the twin cooling was to reduce the heat felt by the rider and the passenger, they were able to seize an opportunity there when they raised that compression ratio to 10-to-1. And it actually resulted in a little bit more power gain out of having that twin cooling. One of the benefits of having the twin cooling, the liquid-cooled cylinder heads, was that the bikes were able to maintain a more constant temperature, and by being able to maintain a more constant temperature, especially in hot ambient conditions, this allowed the engine to maintain power. As air-cooled engines heat up, they lose power. This wasn't such an issue with the twin cooling in the heads. The twin-cooled bikes could actually be ridden in an emergency without coolant to get you somewhere for service, or at least get somewhere to spend the night to where you could get the bike towed, or maybe even ride it a little further, which was a good thing because if you all may recall, a lot of the first model years of the twin cooling, they had issues with the electric pumps down in the front of the bikes. Well, the housings would crack and they would leak all the coolant out. So it was a good thing you could ride these bikes without coolant. It would just basically operate as an air and oil cooled bike. Although you didn't want to ride it like that all the time, and you didn't want to ride it too hard like that because essentially the bikes were supposed to have coolant running through the heads, which was to cool that down so that you didn't get knocking and pinging with the 10-to-1 compression with the way the bikes were tuned. If all that made sense, I kind of went down a rabbit hole there. 2014 was a really great year for Harley-Davidson. We saw a lot of changes. Now, for the 2014 model year, the Road Glide was actually on hiatus. There wasn't a 2014 Road Glide. That bike was out for that year being freshened up, and as we all know, it came back in 2015 completely redone with all the Rushmore fittings and the new fairing. Now, as I mentioned, Project Rushmore actually touched some of the other Harley-Davidson model families while that Road Glide was out on hiatus. The Dyna family, we actually saw the Super Glide receive the 103 as well as the Dyna Street Bob. Now, little thing to note about the Super Glide and the Street Bob, these two bikes did get a 103, but it was the non-HO version. It did not have the high output 103. So this 103 still had the 496 lift cams in it. It never did receive the 511 cams. Also in 2014, the V-Rod and the Sportster line were actually being offered with an ABS option now. So if you chose to pay more, if you bought one of those new, you could actually get ABS on your V-Rod or your Sportster. So if you're looking at a used V-Rod or Sportster that's 2014 or newer, that's definitely something to look for to see if maybe the bike had the factory ABS installed on it. When it comes to the Rushmore bikes, there was so much to these motorcycles, that was a lot to go through. So guys, if I missed anything of importance regarding the Rushmore bikes, let me know down in the comments. And also, I want your opinions on the Rushmore bikes versus the 2013 and earlier. What do you guys think of the improvements? Were they good? Were they bad? Do you like the new ones over the old ones? What's your opinion on those? The 2014 and later models, they certainly have a lot of improvements on them, so it might be worth your time and effort and maybe stretching your budget just a little bit if you're looking at a touring bike to maybe try to get a 2014 or later that's got all the tech and all the updates on it. But anyhow guys, that's all I've got for you this week. If you guys enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. But till next week guys, you stay safe on the streets, ride smart, dodge those cars, and I'll catch you guys back here next week with a brand new video. Thanks for watching.